Welcome to the Cochrane Show, a Vancouver Canucks edition of the Cochrane Show. I'm John Cochrane. That is Scott Cochrane. He's my dad. He's in Canada where it's winter. And Dad,
Yes.
35 degrees and cloudy in Townsville right now. It's just disgusting.
Well, it depends what you mean by disgusting. It is technically almost winter here, but it's like where I live, it's about 5, 6 degrees today. It was kind of showery. So not a lot of winter action, not a lot of cold and snow.
No, yeah, but I'd rather that than melting when you go outside.
That sounds pretty gross what you're describing. Come on up here. We can play golf and not even be too hot.
Come to the Down Under.
Down under.
Down Under. So there's been some big news with the Vancouver Canucks.
Yeah.
Quinn Hughes traded, first one of the team, maybe the blowing up the team, the first move.
Quinn Hughes is without a doubt one of the top 2 or 3 players in the 50-year history of the Canucks. They started in 1970. For those who know the NHL, who know the Vancouver Canucks history, they haven't had a lot of stars. They had Pavel Bure back in the 90s, but in terms of defensemen, Quinn Hughes is at another level. He won the Norris Trophy a couple of years ago as the best NHL defenseman. Clearly one of the top just elite players in the league, and he's gone.
And Dad, this was something that you predicted on an episode of the Cochrane Show 3 months ago. So let's just bring that up now. We kept the receipts of your statement, and here it is. So this is, as you can see, 3 months ago. There you are. Here goes the Cochrane Show.
That the Canucks are on a positive trajectory. I think if Hughes sees this team is going someplace, the core that we've retained and the new pieces that are coming in, I could play with this team. I think there's a good chance that he continues to bring his A game and he continues to lead the Canucks throughout the season and into the future, and he re-signs. But here's the issue. I think if the Canucks are struggling by midseason, if they're not doing well at Christmas time, now I think management has a new problem on their hands. Now they're probably thinking, you know what? He's going to bring his A game, but he's going to want to get out of here. And because of that, and because of impending free agency, then before the trade deadline, I think the Canucks move him to try to get an asset back again.
There it is.
There it is. And
Prediction.
I think it's exactly what happened. I think the only thing that was different from my analysis was that it turns out that Quinn Hughes wasn't waiting till this year to decide if he was going to leave. It sounds like he had let management know even last year that he wasn't going to re-sign in Vancouver. So with all of that, though, I think the Canucks, it really forced their hand. I think it was a bold move because the longer you wait with an impending free agent, the lower their market value is. Because every other team in the league knows you're going to have to dump this guy at some point. And at this point of the season, there are a lot of teams who wanted a shot at Quinn Hughes, and that kept upping the offers. And as you know, and as our listeners know, ultimately, the Minnesota Wild came up with the best offer. And I think, how do you decide, John, who wins and who loses a trade? Usually you say the team who got the best player wins. Well, that would be Minnesota. But I think the Canucks did really well with the 3 young players they got and a first-round draft pick.
Yeah, can you break down the haul that they got in return? So they got a young player from Minnesota, and then, or did they get 3 young players from Minnesota?
3 young players from Minnesota, and one of them in particular, Zeev Bouillon. I'm going to have to learn these guys' last names. He's not going to be a Quinn Hughes, but I think he's going to be a top defenseman for this team. There's no question that the Canucks had to get younger. These were all top draft picks that they picked up. They're all like between 20 and 22 years old, plus the first round draft pick for next year. I think this is exactly what the Canucks need to do. I mean, they're in last place in a 32-team league. So what do you know? Even with the injuries, this team's not going to get you where you've got to go. So you've got to start rebuilding it. And I think it was took a lot of courage to get rid of the best player that the team has had in 20 years, but they got a good return back. 3 good young players and a top draft pick.
So right now, the Minnesota Wild have about the 4th best point record in the NHL. So if that sort of trajectory stays the same, that first round draft pick will probably be around like the 25 to 32, which is still, in the NHL, there's a lot of talent that comes every single year. So the Canucks will have 2 first-round draft picks. Their draft pick could very well be the number 1 overall
That's right.
if, they continue at this stage. You're not going to win the Stanley Cup. So what do they do? You just keep bringing these young guns in, keep developing, but you're not going for W's at this point, in my opinion. Dad, you don't agree with tanking, but it's strategy. What the Canucks need to do is strategically develop players while losing games.
So I'm there with you almost all the way, except for the while losing games. Here's where I agree with you. The Canucks' goal this year is not to win the Stanley Cup. I don't think their goal this year is necessarily even make the playoffs. They've got to be thinking long term. They have to now have a 3-year plan, which I think is what Jim Rutherford, the team president, and Patrick Alvin, the GM, this is what they're doing now. It took them, by the way, a long time to convince ownership to this is the direction they wanted to go. John, in an earlier podcast, you talked about how involved ownership is in these kind of decisions. And you know what? You're not wrong. The last 2 team presidents that the Canucks had and were fired because they kept telling ownership, we're going to have to take a long-term view. But ownership kept saying, no, I want you to make the playoffs this year. That kept the Canucks at mediocrity for a long, long time. Finally, Rutherford convinced ownership, no, we've got to rebuild this team. We're not going to make the playoffs this year. We probably won't make the playoffs next year, but in 3 years, we could be a very competitive team. And it all began with this trade.
Yeah. And so the worst thing that could happen is they just miss the playoffs. Absolute worst thing that could happen for the Canucks this year. Even worse, actually, would make the playoffs as the 8th seed and get bounced in the first round. That helps nobody. I know you talk about, winning culture. Oh, you got to establish a winning culture in your organization. Yeah, we get that. But also, get that first overall draft pick. Think about the future.
So here's, again, believe it or not, there is some common ground here. I stand by what I said, and that is if you train a team culture to lose, that's very hard to get them out of that again. But what you can do, and I think in the case of the Canucks, what you must do is position them for the long term. And that means by necessity, you're not fielding a great team. You're fielding a team that is going to lose games. You got to get your young players getting a lot of ice time. You got to get them in NHL action and so on. And you know what? Those kind of young teams, they're not going to win a lot of games. I think what you don't do when you hear people talk about, they should be tanking, that almost sounds like you want the players to get out there and play poorly. I don't think you ever want that on a team.
Nobody ever thinks that's what tanking is. But
absolutely, people think that. Absolutely, people think that. I just think that you strategically ice a team that does not have a good shot at winning, but will position you well for the long term.
That is exactly what tanking is.
Tanking, in some people's minds, they get angry if you see good players on the ice that are giving it their all. And I just think, no, you can take a longer term view.
You give your good players less ice time, less games to play, and you ice it. You put a team out there that is going to be developing, but they're not going to win many games. Dad, what do the Canucks need to do? I just need you to say it. Say it. Do it.
Do it. I'm never going to use the T word.
Say it. Say the T word.
They're going to tank. What they are going to do, because I'll tell you this much, and I do know that that the team president has said they're not going to get rid of all their veterans. They want to keep some veterans around, and I think it's to develop the young players. Like it's one thing to ice a team of 22-year-olds, but they got to know what to do while they're out there.
I want to give you a hypothetical. Say in this next draft, NHL draft prospects, there's a Connor McDavid, there's a Sidney Crosby, there's a Wayne Gretzky, there's a generational talent that everybody knows that's the clear-cut franchise player that's going to be the face of the league for next 10 years. Are you telling me the Canucks should not try to lose more games in order to get a draft pick to draft that guy?
All I'm saying is they should be playing for the future. And if that future includes a generational talent, of course, that should be on their radar.
No political. Just say they need to tank.
They don't need to tank. They need to play the long-term game.
I hope someone comments and just calls out this hypocrisy.
There's no hypocrisy. It's just
bureaucracy. I'll use bureaucracy.
If I'm a team president, if I'm a general manager, I would never, ever allow that kind of language in the dressing room. And nor would I say, as we're getting down the stretch, I would never, field a team with the intention of losing. I would field a team that says we got to position this for the long term. Maybe that'll end up being the same thing, but I don't know. I'm a big believer in the kind of culture of an organization you're even trying to.
So if you're the team president, this is what you're doing. You're saying into Chat GPT, I need to tank, but we can't use that language around here. So soften it up for me. That's what you're doing right now. You're saying the exact same thing without using the T word.
Not at all. Not at all. No way.
So one aspect, well, let's just stay with the Canucks here for a sec, Dad.
Yeah.
Is there another move to be made before the trade deadline this year?
Probably. But one thing that's interesting about the Canucks, at least it's interesting about Jim Rutherford, he tends to make his deals well before the trade deadline. This was an example of that. He seems to not like the feeding frenzy that takes place at the trade deadline. So he gets out 6 weeks, 8 weeks ahead of that. And that's when he does his deals. So I look for the Canucks to make some more player moves even this month. I know there's a pause when you around Christmas time when you can't make deals, but certainly in January, I look for them to be busy again. We keep hearing of a couple of veteran players who could be on the trade block right now. So I think we're going to see some movement, but I do think they're going to retain a core as well. I look for 2 or 3 veteran players to be traded before the end of January.
Okay, so I'm going to pull out my crystal ball.
Oh, there it is. That's very nice.
Yeah, it's right here. And we're going to look into the crystal ball.
All right. What's it telling us, John?
Let's see what it's saying. Pedersen.
False.
Pedersen will be traded. No, the crystal ball doesn't lie.
Well, I think this time it did. I think your crystal ball was tanking there, John. No, I think here's the thing about Pedersen. I think he what? What is that?
Bruh.
Nice. I- Again, you've heard us say this before. I just don't think that there's a market out there for that salary. He's one of the highest paid players in the league. He's been playing better, and I think he's on an upswing. It's interesting as we speak, as we're recording this, the Canucks and the Rangers have been playing. That was where JT Miller was traded to. And we all remember that last year he had all the tension between JT Miller and Pedersen. They got rid of JT Miller. Miller, unfortunately, has been on the decline, and Pedersen has been on the incline. I don't think we're going to see Pedersen back to his 110-point season kind of level he was at before, but I think he's going to be a solid enough contributor that they'll keep him.
For those listeners, if you want to see a new side of Scott Cochrane, he hasn't seen the score of the game. He's going to be watching it later.
That's very true.
Should I
I've seen the first 2 periods. The Canucks are up 2-0 going into the third. That's all I know. I would
All right.
keep it that way.
You better not tell me, is what you're saying. So, Dad, in the NHL, for the Canucks situation, we're going to stay on this tanking theme because that's what the
Sure.
Canucks are doing.
All right.
But
You
other
mean, did I
leagues,
hear you saying that they're playing the long view? Is that what I heard you say?
thank you, Chat GPT. Other leagues around the world have figured out a way to make it so teams don't tank. They're more set up. They're more set up league-wise to allow this to happen. But
Mhm.
in soccer or football over in Europe, with the Champions League, Premier League, whatever the leagues all are, that every league sounds like they're like top tier, but like a Champions League is only like third tier. What does that even mean?
I know, right?
Anyhow, so obviously if you're in one of those leagues, you don't want to get last place because that means you get relegated down to the league below, which has all sorts of implications for your team, ramifications, right? Budgets and player costs and how much you charge for tickets, and has huge. Really, you need to get all the way off the back of relegation.
Well, let me get off that thing. So to put it in, let's say in hockey terms, like the top pro league in North America is the National Hockey League. The league right below that is the American Hockey League. It typically is almost a feeder league to the NHL. So the equivalent of what you're describing would be if you finished in last place in the NHL, let's say the Canucks, or even the last 2 positions, which is what some sports do, you are relegated. In this case, let's say you have to go down to the AHL, and at the same time, the top 2 clubs in the AHL would be promoted to the NHL. That would be kind of the equivalent, right?
Yeah. So maybe the NHL or the NBA could apply some sort of penalty for coming in last. Because right now, the reason why I want the Canucks to suck is because you are rewarded the more you suck, right?
True.
You get there's like a prize at the end of the season for those that win and those that are the worst. I
Yep.
don't know many other leagues around the world that you get rewarded for being the worst team. So instead of getting rewarded with a new shiny toy, in this case, the first overall draft pick in the draft, maybe you should get dropped down to another league. Go down to the American Hockey League.
I think there's a lot of good reasons that that should be considered. You talk about one of them right now. You would take out that incentive to not do well, that taking the long view that some people talk about, right? So that's legitimate. I think the NHL, NBA, and other leagues have tried to address that by putting a lottery system in on the draft, because that's why you want to potentially not finish as high, because hey, we're going to get that better draft pick. So when they put in the lottery, that was supposed to help with that. Here's what this was the problem that the NHL was trying to solve, going right back to the 1960s. Back in the day, if you look at the Stanley Cup today and you see that the Montreal Canadiens have won the Stanley Cup 24 times, tons more than anybody else, right? Well, the reason for that was up until 1967, the league had what was called territorial protections. There was no draft. Basically, any French Canadian player was owned by the Montreal Canadiens. So you would start owning players much like you do in British football, right from the fact they could have been 12 years old and you own them all the way up the system kind of thing. And so no other team in the league could ever sign those players. And so Montreal, because it was such a and Quebec such a hockey hotbed, they were always dominating. In 67, the league says, we can't keep doing this anymore. We're going to get rid of territorial protections. We're going to put in a draft. And that was the first year of the amateur draft. And for a lot of years, it worked. Suddenly, there were French Canadian players everywhere, and everything kind of balanced out, except for the problem that we have now. And that is where there is such a huge advantage sometimes for teams not to finish higher up in the league. Now, what would be the problems with relegation? And you already touched on them. How does the economics of sports work when you built a team on a business model of being in the top league? The television revenue, the ticket sale revenue, all those kind of things, that justifies your business. Now you go down to, let's say, the American Hockey League, where you're making what, a third of the revenue kind of thing, but you still have all the expenses. So I don't know, John, how would you get around that?
I don't know. Maybe the players have to take a pay cut. They're no longer in the team that in the league where they can make 10 million a year, so they go down to a league where, they make, I don't know, a million. Do American Hockey League players make, they probably make less than a million, probably like
Well,
100,000.
yeah, they're pros, so they make good money. Even a lot of what can happen right now, of course, in the NHL is you could be sent down and called up all the time. And typically, when you're sent down, you're earning less, unless you've got a special clause in your
Yeah,
contract
a
that they
two-way
can't.
contract they call
That's
those,
right.
right?
That's right.
Yeah.
So I would imagine, again, I don't want to solve problems we don't have yet, but if there was relegation in the NHL, if I'm a player agent, I would just make sure that all of my players
Yeah.
have clauses that you can't change their salary.
Now, clearly, we're talking 100% unrealistic hypothetical. Like there's no 0% chance that this happens at all, but it sort of draws to this bigger issue of what can leagues do to make it so people aren't trying to lose. And we've talked about this in podcasts before because it is a reality. Tanking happens in all leagues. The lottery system maybe tried to help a little bit. Maybe it's like if you don't make the playoffs, it's equal odds for every team that doesn't make the playoffs. So it's not just bottom three get 14.5% or whatever it is, but every single team that doesn't make the playoffs has the same odds. I don't know.
Basically, going back to before the lottery. Is that the idea?
No, before the lottery, it was your draft pick had to do with where you finished. So if you finished last, you got that number one pick.
Right.
So right now there is a lottery system, but it's like the 3 worst teams have the same percentage, and then the next 3 have this lower but the same percentage, and so on and so forth. But maybe it's the bottom 10 teams or whatever all have the same odds to get that number 1 pick.
Do you think it would work, John, if I mean, a lot of the way that the draft and the lottery is set up is to, in effect, it's kind of a reward system. Depending on how you finish, you can get the reward of a great draft pick, one of these generational talents. Should there be some kind of a punishment? That's kind of what relegation is. There's a punishment for finishing low. Is there another punishment? As you say, the NHL, NBA, we're not really ever going to see relegation, but is there something else that could happen?
I don't see a world where they would change it. I think what the NBA has done with the NC's with I know you don't like play-in thoughts, but what the
Mhm.
NBA has done with the play-in tournament has really helped negate tanking. What has helped make it more exciting is you see a lot more trades happen in the NBA because teams at the trade deadline, like the Canucks are doing, recognize this isn't going to work. We're not even close to a championship. And so we're going to trade away to get as much draft capital as we can. Therefore, even if we don't get the number 1 overall pick, we might be getting 3 first round picks this year, where we can add more young talent and have that longer view. So I don't know if there's ever going to be a penalty system, but
Here's an example of one. Now, this is not on as big a scale as we're talking about the draft and teams that finish low in the league. But you and I did a podcast one time, John, where we looked at potential rule changes in different kind of sports and what we'd like to see. This year, after the World Series in baseball, there was a lot of talk about, as glorious as this year's playoffs were, and the World Series itself was one of the best ever. The moments that sucked was the strategy of walking batters. You had some of these batters, especially on the Dodgers, that everyone came to see, and the Blue Jays would just walk them, and it was so boring, kind of thing. Plus, these were the stars everyone came to see. Well, one of the ideas that started to circulate then was, okay, you can walk anybody you want, but they don't get one base; they get two if it's an
yep,
intentional walk,
yep.
right? So, in other words, I like the idea. I don't know if Major League Baseball will ever do that, but I like the idea of saying, let's just, take a step back and let's look at this from a different angle. Is there another kind of punishment that we can put in that won't change everything, but at least causes a team to step back and say, we got to rethink this because there's a higher risk involved here. I don't know what that would mean as far as draft and finishing order is concerned, but maybe there's something else that no one's thought of yet.
Having, let's say you do get last, maybe you keep your first round draft pick, but you lose your second.
I was just wondering that as well. The league is very interested in parity. They want the bad teams to get better.
Yeah. Which is good for the sport, like having parity or having the bad teams not stay bad is a bonus. Or what if you are bad for 2 years in a row, then you're penalized? Like if you finish last 2 years in a row, then that next year you lose your first round draft pick. It has to go, and like that's your penalty.
What if there's another way? I know this is probably not for recording purposes, but I think you're really onto something when it comes to relegation, but it'll never happen in the classic sense.
No.
You'll never see the New York Rangers playing in the American Hockey League. Well, that's just not going to happen. But I wonder if they could restructure the league itself away from geography and into different tiers within the league itself.
Hmm.
And again, I don't know exactly what that looks like, but I'll give you an example. This is not so much in the structure, but like in the playoffs, maybe we'll talk about this when we come back on. One of the things that has bugged me for years is how little it matters to finish higher in the standings. What do you get? You could have a playoff matchup where you finish 30 points ahead of another team, but they're hot, you're not, and they beat you in 6 games or
Well, you
7 games.
get home ice advantage.
That's all you get. That's all you get. You get one extra game at home, which you might never play because really the extra game you're getting is game 7, right? And you might not actually even get there. So I always thought, why not, depending on how many points ahead you are of another team, you get 5 home games to their 2. You know, like put a better incentive on for that. Now, again, what does that kind of thinking look like when you're lower in the standings? I don't know, but maybe there's just other ways to have rewards and other ways to have punishments.
Well, I have an idea. So this is what the punishment should be, in my opinion. The punishment should be if you finish last, you have to play 10 more road games than everybody else. Or maybe it's not that because that's financially doomed for owners.
Yes.
Maybe it's you have to play 3 extra back to backs compared to everybody else. Like have some sort of regular season penalty for the next year that just makes you a little bit more uncomfortable than everybody else.
That's interesting. What if, and again, you tell me this is worthwhile us talking about in the recording. Right now, what does making the playoffs mean? You've essentially, I mean, it's complicated in the NHL, but basically it's the top 16 teams, right?
Yeah.
What if it was a little bit different and it was based on winning percentage to make the playoffs? But the lower, if you finish really low, you've actually got to get a higher winning percentage to make the playoffs or something. Again, the league might not like that because they want parity and everything, but
Well, I think, and by the way, I'll probably keep some of this in because the casualness is good.
yeah.
I think, what if we're just on your playoff
Yeah.
conversation right now? Instead of penalizing the worst team in the playoffs, you are rewarding the best team. And we've talked about this before, where one doesn't play 8, one plays who they wish.
Yeah, I love that. I wish the league would do that. If you finish first, I think one of the perks should be you look at the other, say, 7 teams in your conference that made the playoffs and you pick. You get the
Yeah, because it
choice
could
of
just
those
be
7.
matchup based, right?
Absolutely. Number 2, you get the 6 teams that are left over. Number 3 and so on. And I think, yeah, some people say, "Oh, you're just giving the team that gets picked, you're giving them incentive to wanna win." Who cares? You might have, as a first place team, all sorts of reasons not to wanna play the team you would normally be matched up against. It could be geography, travel, or you just don't match up well with them. No, I think spot on. The higher you finish, you should be able to pick your opponent.
Yeah. Now, I think I would reserve that just for the 1 seed. You can't reward 2, 3 seeds. I think you just reward the 1 seed. So, say 1 chooses 5, 2 still plays 8, right? Because 1's not playing 8. So, 2 plays 8, 3 plays 7, 4 plays 6.
Yeah. All right, I could see that, but I also don't mind if it's just every team gets to choose. It's just that the lower you're finishing, you've got a much smaller pool of teams to choose from because they're all getting picked, right?
I hear that, but then you're not really trying to get that 1 seed. Like, this is enticing teams to, the last 10 games of the season to continue to try and get that best record. Like, you wanna have a race to the finish line.
Yeah, I think you're onto something there, John, because again, this is true in hockey. I would suspect it's true in basketball as well. Finishing first overall should mean more than it does. As you know, in most football leagues around the world, soccer, but most football leagues around the world where they don't even have playoffs, the whole thing is finishing first. You're the champion if you finish first, kind of thing. I think in North America, we're always going to want to have playoffs, but finishing first should mean more than it does. In the NHL, you now get a trophy. This has been around for 20 or 30 years, the so-called President's Trophy, but who cares? It should mean more in the playoffs than it does. Too many first place teams get bounced in the first round.
Playoffs? I just
You
wanna
want to
win a
talk
game.
playoffs?
Playoff?
You got to run that clip.
Well, I think we've solved some world issues today, Dad.
I think we have some are insolvable, such as is there a difference between tanking and just playing for the long term? We'll have to wait on that. Figuring out just how to make it sting more to finish lower without making it harder to rebound and rebuild your team. That's one that maybe smarter minds than us have to figure out.
I have one more point on it, and then we'll wrap up. What if you finish last, your whole organization is taxed? So on top of your federal tax, on top of your provincial tax or your state tax, you're getting an extra suckage tax. Players get taxed an extra 10% on their money goes to a pool that gets distributed to the President's Trophy winner, which means, but then it's like, oh, that's going to benefit the organization because they're not paying as much. Well, no, they're getting taxed 10% as well, which is going to the organization that wins it all. Take some money out of the hands of the suckage and put it into the hands of the dominance.
Yes, I see that. But maybe, John, maybe we're approaching this from the wrong side. Maybe it's not how do we make it sting more to finish lower so you don't want to finish lower? Maybe instead is there a way to incentivize it so that you don't want to lose those games at the end? Is there something outside
Yeah.
the draft choice itself? Is there some way to say, guys, we need to win 5 more games because if we do, fill in the blank. Like maybe there's something we can put in there to incentivize.
Well, comment below if you have any answers for us to solve these problems in the NBA, NHL. NFL's got it sorted because they give the first round bye. But Dad, I reckon we should get out of here and have a great week.
You too. See ya.